Battle of Midway, the freshwater code trick, and the minute that changed the war. June 1942. The Pacific looks calm, sun glittering on an endless sheet of blue, but that calm is a mask. Beneath it, two fleets feel for each other like knife fighters in a dark room. One side believes its momentum is unstoppable. The other has been battered, but it is watching, listening, and waiting for a single opening. The story of Midway is the story of how intelligence, discipline, and one exquisitely timed strike can turn an ocean dot. After Pearl Harbor, Japan's advance felt tidal. The Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies each fell with a speed that stunned observers worldwide. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier arm, staffed by elite pilots and deck crews, seemed to dictate the tempo of the war. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 was the first serious check, a tactical draw, but a strategic message carriers could be stopped. Japan's next step was crafted by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a realist who understood American industry, yet believed a decisive blow could still break American will. The target, Midway Atoll, a small speck northwest of Hawaii that served as an air base, a listening post, and a tripwire. Strike Midway, threaten Hawaii, and force the remaining U.S. carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and the damaged Yorktown into a fight on Japanese terms. The spear point for the operation was the Kido Butai, the most formidable carrier force on the planet. Akagi Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. On the American side, Admiral Chester Nimitz faced a harsh arithmetic. He had fewer carriers, a still recovering Pacific fleet, and an enemy accustomed to quick victories. The advantage he did possess was invisible. The work of cryptanalysts in a windowless space at Pearl Harbor, known as Station HYPO. There, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team sifted through fragments of intercepted Japanese messages, rebuilding codebooks by inference, pattern, and patience. By late May, HYPO was confident that Japan intended to strike a target designated AF. But they could not prove what AF meant. Rochefort proposed a test. Midway's garrison would broadcast in the clear that its desalination system had failed, and the island was short of fresh water. Not long after, Japanese traffic, this time encrypted, reported that AF is short of water. The inference was now a fact. AF was Midway. With the objective confirmed and approximate timing inferred, Nimitz moved to the only winning strategy available. Enterprise and Hornet would sail under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance. Yorktown, patched at incredible speed after Coral Sea, would join under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Their task was brutally simple. Find the enemy carriers first and hit them first. Intelligence does not sink ships on its own. It offers a map. Aviators and sailors must walk the path. The night before the battle, crews reviewed recognition silhouettes and fuel calculations. Armorers confirmed bomb fuses and torpedo settings. Pilots traced likely intercept points with pencils across grid-marked charts. On Midway itself, Army, Navy, and Marine aviators prepared blunt instruments for a subtle fight. Land-based bombers and torpedo planes that would have to thread walls of flak and Zero fighters. At dawn on June 4th, the first blows fell. Japanese aircraft lifted from Akagi Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, and roared toward Midway. The strike hit hard, clearing runways, shredding structures, but did not shut the airfield. The Japanese strike leader radioed that a second attack would be required. From the flag bridge of his carrier, Admiral Kiichi Nagumo faced a decision with no perfect answer. He had held a reserve of aircraft, planning to rearm them depending on what the day revealed. Should he immediately search for and strike the American carriers he suspected were in the area? Or should he rearm for a second blow on Midway to ensure the base could not launch further sorties? Nagumo chose to prepare a second strike on the island. His crews began the intricate dance of moving bombs and torpedoes, shifting fuses, fueling aircraft. At the same time, he kept a protective combat air patrol, the deadly Zero fighters, circling above to swat down American attacks that were already knifing in piecemeal. B-26s and B-17s from Midway, dive bombers forced to release from too high, torpedo planes groping for a firing line. Many attackers never came back. But they achieved two things that would matter. They kept the Japanese busy, and they stretched the combat. Air patrol thin and low. Out at sea, Spruance and Fletcher launched their own strikes in waves, each pieced together with imperfect information. The torpedo squadrons VT-8 from Hornet, VT-6 from Enterprise, and VT-3 from Yorktown flew, obsolete devastators, low and slow toward the most heavily defended ships afloat. They attacked without the synchronized top cover their tactics required, and they paid brutally. One by one, they fell to zeros and anti-aircraft fire. VT-8's attack became legend as near total sacrifice. Almost none of those crews survived the approach. The world could call it futile. The facts say otherwise. In dying, they pulled the umbrella of Japanese fighters downward and outward, away from altitude and away from the fleet's center. Above, in a thinning sky, dive bomber groups searched. From Enterprise, Commander C. Wade McClusky's air group flew a long, increasingly desperate sweep. Fuel burned down. The ocean below looked empty. Then McClusky saw a thread in the pattern. A lone Japanese destroyer, Arashi, racing at full speed. Why would a destroyer run that hard unless it were rejoining the main body after depth charging a submarine? McClusky took the gamble that separates a good tactician from a decisive one. He followed the wake. The wake led to 4 Japanese carriers, spread on the blue like a hand of cards. And in that exact minute, Japanese decks were as vulnerable as they would ever be. Crews had just finished recovering aircraft from the first strike and were in the churn of rearming for another. Fuel hoses snaked across planks. Bombs and torpedoes were staged. The protective fighters were down low and out of position after chasing the torpedo planes. The geometry of chance and decision had aligned. Dive-bombers fell from the sun in steep, screaming arcs. From Enterprise, VB-6 and VS-6 split on their runs. From Yorktown, VB-3 arrived to add its weight. Bombs struck Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu in quick succession. On Kaga, a bomb plowed into the flight deck and detonated among armed aircraft. Fires flashed into infernos. On Akagi, a single well-placed bomb near the amidships elevator set off a chain of blast and flame that no damage control team could contain. On Soryu, multiple hits turned the ship into a funeral pyre within minutes. The sound of those impacts was not just metal and fire. It was a doctrine cracking. Only Hiryu survived the initial catastrophe. Her captain and air group commander responded with speed and skill. To counterstrikes lifted from her deck, found Yorktown, and hit hard bombs, and later torpedoes battered the American carrier, halted her, then left her stricken. Yorktown's crew fought to save her, and for a time brought light and power back enough to confuse Japanese spotters into thinking they faced a second intact carrier. In the arithmetic of battle, that confusion bought precious minutes. American aviators, guided by scout reports and experience, located Hiryu. Later in the afternoon, dive bombers struck again. Flames climbed. The 4th Japanese carrier was mortally wounded. As evening approached, the decision was sealed. The Kido, Butawance, the sharpest sword in the Pacific, had lost its cutting edge in a single day. Numbers tell part of the story. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers and many of its most seasoned aviators. The United States lost Yorktown and suffered grievous casualties among torpedo squadrons, but preserved the Enterprise and Hornet air groups that had delivered the decisive blows. More important than numbers was the direction of the war's momentum. Midway erased the aura of Japanese carrier invincibility and deprived Japan of veteran crews it could not replace at the rate America could train. To understand the battle's internal logic, imagine 3 charts explained here, in words rather than lines. The first is a disposition of carriers and air groups at dawn, for Japanese fleet carriers in 2 divisions, each with a balanced mix of fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo aircraft, and 3 American carriers with smaller but capable groups, plus Midway's island-based aircraft. On paper, Japan holds the striking power. In practice, American foreknowledge of the target and the ambush position narrows the gap. The second chart is a waves timeline for June 4th. Early, Midway-based raids that inflict little material damage but keep the Japanese busy. The staggered, sacrificial torpedo attacks from VT-8, VT-6, and VT-3 that dragged the Zeros down, and then, converging like the teeth of a gear, the arrival of Enterprise's VB-6 and VS-6 and Yorktown's VB-3 over the enemy's center at the critical moment. That convergence is not neat or centrally orchestrated. It's the product of pilots' choices, a destroyer's wake, and a commander's willingness to follow an inference to its end. The third chart is losses. On one side, for Japanese carriers that cannot be replaced quickly, along with many highly trained pilots and deck crews whose experience took years to build. On the other, one American carrier lost and torpedo squadrons shattered, with dive bomber units bloodied but still intact. Strategically, the exchange is transformational. Japan's ability to take the initiative with fast carrier raids is broken. The United States, with industrial capacity ramping and training pipelines expanding, will now move island by island westward. Intelligence opened the door at Midway. The freshwater ruse was not a stunt. It was a disciplined test that converted an estimate into certainty. But intelligence only mattered because aviators flew into walls of fire and sailors fought flames on steel decks. The torpedo crews who attacked low and slow, facing Zero fighters and converging flak, did not die for nothing. Their sacrifice pulled the shield away. The dive bomber squadrons that arrived above an enemy arrayed for rearming were not lucky by accident. They were lucky by a chain of choices McCluskys, most of all made under pressure with fuel. Needles sinking toward empty dot. After the fight, the ocean kept its calm face. Survivors watched ships burn down to the waterline and slip beneath, taking engines, men, and secrets with them. In the days that followed, Yorktown towed and fought forward be lost to a submarine's torpedoes. The Japanese fleet, stunned, withdrew. The war was nowhere near over. There would be Guadalcanal and the long grind through the Solomons and Central Pacific. There would be fierce battles on beaches and in skies far from Midway's reefs. But that day in June, the Pacific changed its direction. Midway endures because it compresses the elements of naval war into a single narrative. Signals and shadows, courage and fear, the physics of fuel, altitude, and timing, the chemistry of gasoline and explosives igniting in places meant for order, and the human calculus of decisions made with incomplete information. It endures because a simple phrase, AF is short of water, became the thread that, when pulled, unraveled a plan. It endures because a minute on a clock face, some ordinary minute like any other, became the hinge on which an ocean turned. When we speak of Midway, we honor not just victory but clarity. Clarity that knowledge without action is sterile, and action without knowledge is blind. Clarity that sacrifice can create an opening others can use. Clarity that, in war as in life, preparedness and nerve make luck look inevitable. The freshwater trick revealed the target. The dive bombers arrived in the exact minute when decks were most exposed. The losses on each side redrew the map of possibility. Out on that bright June sea, men followed wakes, found carriers in the glare, and fell from the sun toward fate. The Pacific has many stories. This is one it remembers.